I started as a biologist at university, and I thought I was going to be a biologist. It didn't quite work out that way. I ended up in broadcasting, and for a decade or so I made films in the tropics initially about how London Zoo collected animals. And then I became a television executive and was given the responsibility of looking after a new channel called BBC Two. And the editorial aim of BBC Two was that it wouldn't be like any other channel.
Good evening. This is BBC Two.
And one of the things that we developed in order to stick to that brief was to take a really important subject and give it proper treatment. And a 13-part series. 13 parts because it's actually the quarter of the year, and we planned in quarters in those days. They don't anymore. And the first one of those, which people were a bit suspicious about when I first put it up, was Civilization with Kenneth Clarke. And to everybody's surprise, but I'm happy to say not mine, it was a wow. I mean, people were hugely, they delighted to make an appointment on whatever day it was of the week and look after it for 13 weeks. And that was so successful, I then commissioned another one on the development of science with a man called Jacob Bronowski, which was great. And it was clear to me as a television executive that the story to tell, of course, was actually the one about the development of life. And I eventually decided that I wanted to do that. I didn't want anybody else to do that. My worry was that somebody else would do it. If they came up with the idea to me as a television executive and say, we've got this great idea, what about telling the story of life on Earth in 13 parts? I'd have to say yes, I couldn't turn it down. But nobody did. And I managed to retire or resign from the BBC staff in order to do that series. And I had the time of my life. To see all the wonderful things, all the animals, the species that you knew, and to have a good excuse for being sent to New Zealand or the heart of Congo or wherever it was that I wanted to look at. And I just saw all these fabulous things. And I had 3 of the most wonderful years of my life. We planned it to go around the world, but we had to go around the world twice because of seasons. And so you did in one route around the world, then another one. And then little twiddly bits in between. But it was a most marvellous time. I suppose the highlight that I'm never allowed to forget, and I never wish to forget either, was meeting the gorillas, mountain gorillas, with Dian Fossey. Certainly nothing I've ever filmed before or since has been shown quite so frequently as that. And it was, for me, almost a life-changing moment, really.
There is more meaning and mutual understanding in exchanging a glance with a gorilla than any other animal I know. We're so similar. Their sight, their hearing, their sense of smell are so similar to ours that we see the world in the same way as they do.
But the credit for it, of course, doesn't belong to me. I mean, it belongs to Dian Fossey, because it happened. Had she not habituated those gorillas, we would have never got anywhere near them. But it's one of the most memorable episodes of my life. The marvellous thing is that there are always new things for you, but also there are new things for science. I mean, we are still discovering those things, and in the depths of the ocean, where I've been to subsequently, because 40 years ago we didn't have the submersibles that we have now. But I can write about it now, and I can add bits and details into the new edition, which I hope will refresh the experience and the writing, because one has gone on as years have gone by, looking and seeing and being given these remarkable insights. Looking back at it, I can't believe I've been as lucky. I mean, who could possibly believe that they would spend 40 years going around looking at all the most wonderful things that life has to offer and show on this planet? I can't imagine a greater privilege. The problem is that you mustn't tell the story as though these animals were trying to do this. They aren't, but each species represents a moment in the history of the development of life, so that you can build it up into a chapter. And so the chapters have a logic to them, which anyone can see. I mean, you start with animals that are little more than blobs, like jellyfish, and then that becomes more complex. As it becomes more complex, you develop a backbone, which you need in order to structure things, to put on a mouth, to put on limbs. Then I'm now looking at development of backbone animals, but from those the fish then slowly move up onto land by turning their fins turn into limbs, and their skin is still wet, and they still breathe to some degree through the skin, but they move up onto land. That's one chapter. And for fish to land walking. And then the skin, wet skin, becomes dry, and they develop a shell around their eggs. And that's a reptile. And the reptile moves on to the dry places. The reptiles then have a huge development, of which the most dramatic, of course, is the dinosaurs. But they also, at the same time, and this is an episode that we know more about now than we did when I first made the series, they developed feathers. Feathers which weren't initially, we now know, in order to fly, or to enable them to fly. They were feathers to keep themselves warm. And once they started keeping warm, there was another group which did it in another way. Instead of having feathers, they had fur. They became the mammals. Those that had feathers eventually led to the birds. And then once we get to mammals, I allow myself the freedom to look at the mammals in perhaps more detail than we do in the other groups. And that ends with simple mammals like shrews and so on, small little things that scuttle around on the ground and catching insects. And it ends, of course, with primates, with monkeys and apes, and of course, and then ourselves. And so when you see yourself as playing a part in that long, fantastic panorama of life, 3,500 million years long, it's very satisfying, as far as I'm concerned, that you're a part of this, that you're a character in this story. It's the greatest story.